Hello, everyone. My name is Vijeta Chakraborty. I'm a senior product manager for Amazon S3, and I'm here to talk about Amazon S3 Replication. Today, we'll talk about what S3 Replication can do for you and how you can set it up. We'll talk about the different replication offerings, including replication time control and the ability to replicate to multiple destinations. Next, we'll take a step-by-step approach of configuring S3 Replication. And around the end, we will talk through a few different types of customer use cases. S3 Replication is an elastic, fully managed, low-cost feature that automatically replicates objects between buckets. S3 Replication gives you several different options. For example, you can replicate within the same AWS region with S3 Same Region Replication, or different AWS regions with S3 Cross-Region Replication. If you're a customer that needs predictable replication backed by an SLA, S3 Replication Time Control lets you replicate objects within 15 minutes of upload. Recently, we launched a whole bunch of new features in S3 Replication to address more of our customer requirements. Now, for example, you can replicate from a single source bucket to multiple destinations in the same or different AWS regions. You can enable two-way replication between two or more primary buckets, and you also have the option to enable replication metrics and failure notifications with your cross-region as well as same-region traffic. What's interesting about S3 Replication is that it gives you a ton of flexibility on how you want to store and access your data. For example, you can use replication to directly put objects into S3 Glacier, S3 Glacier Deep Archive, or another storage class in the destination bucket. That way, you're optimizing on cost as well as performance for your primary and your secondary copies of data. Another thing to note is that you can maintain objects in your secondary copy with different ownership. Regardless of who owns the source bucket, you can tell Amazon S3 to change the replica ownership to the AWS account that owns the destination bucket. Customers will always use this option to restrict access to object replicas. Another final thing to note here is that replication lets you make copies of your objects that retain all of the metadata, such as the original object creation time and version IDs. Why do you use replication? All right, let's talk through some of those reasons. So replicating data in the cloud is essential for a lot of our customers. And there are various different use cases for which S3 Replication is the right solution. For example, there's data protection, where you'd want to store a copy of your data, maybe in a different AWS account for protection against malicious acts. You might have data sovereignty requirements that dictate that your data be kept within a certain region or country. Financial industry customers also often have compliance requirements that dictate that at least one or more copy of the data is maintained in a secure region 100 miles away. Of late, we are seeing a lot more new use cases of customers wanting to move data closer to their users or closer to their compute workloads for lower efficiency, for lower latency, as well as higher efficiency. Recently, we launched replication metrics and notifications for all of your replication traffic. Now you're able to track object spending, byte spending, and operation spending, as well as replication latencies between source and destination buckets through the S3 Management Console or on the Amazon CloudWatch. Additionally, you can also receive replication failure events to quickly diagnose and correct any issues by enabling Operation Failed Replication on that source bucket. This event notification will give you the object key name, the reason for the failure, so you can specifically debug this issue going forward. Let's spend some time talking about S3 Replication Time Control, or S3 RTC. S3 RTC helps you meet compliance or business requirements for data protection. Typically, S3 RTC replicates most objects that you upload to Amazon S3 in seconds, and 99.99% of those objects within 15 minutes. RTC is backed by an SLA that states that customers will be eligible to get a service credit in the event that AWS S3 does not meet the RTC feature commitment of replicating 99.9% of objects within 15 minutes of upload. We see many different use cases for RTC across financial industries and other industries, for example. Customers use S3 RTC for the time-based guarantee on replication. It helps them meet compliance requirements and report out recovery point objectives at a minute-level granularity. S3 RTC also helps you monitor the replication progress and track which operations, if any, come after that 15-minute threshold. Here on the right-hand side of this graph on my screen, you can see all of the replication metrics that come by default with replication time control. If you look closely on the bottom right in the replication latency graph, you'll see how the value peaks in between the replication progress and then falls back down to 0 when the source and destination buckets are in sync. There's 3 primary events with S3 RTC that I want to share today with all of you. And customers can monitor these events through Amazon SQS, SNS, and Lambda. The 3 events are Operation Failed Replication, Operation Missed Threshold, and Operation Replicated After Threshold. In this slide, we are demonstrating how a customer might use the Operation Missed Threshold and the Operation Replicated After Threshold to monitor the recovery point objective. Let's look at this example. Say we upload an object to the bucket at 9 a.m. Due to an unforeseen outage, our new object does not replicate to the region in 15 minutes. At 9:15, Amazon S3 emits Operation Missed Threshold. Object replicates to the destination, let's say by 9:18 a.m. And then Amazon S3 will now emit a new event saying Operation Replicated After Threshold at 9:18 a.m. Hopefully that gives you an insight into how to use these events. Let's change topics. Recently, we launched a new feature where now you can replicate from a single source bucket to multiple destination buckets in the same or different AWS regions. You can monitor the replication progress for each of these destinations and choose to enable S3 RTC for one or more region pairs. This ability to replicate to multiple destinations is really unique in the industry, and it's great for customers that have geographically distributed users and want to minimize latencies for data access. Now let's look at how you'd set up S3 replication. Let's walk through an example. Let's say you want to keep a secondary copy of your data in a different region for business continuity reasons in the event of any failures in your primary region. Your primary region is US East, and you want to keep the secondary copy in US West. To restrict access to the secondary copy of your data, you want to replicate data across accounts. That is from AWS account A to AWS account B. In this example, I'd like you to be mindful of a few things. First, you will need to enable S3 versioning for both buckets. Now, this is true for any replication, not only cross-account replication. Second, you will need to create an IAM role for each account and attach the required permission policies. And third, you will need to allow the source bucket to put objects in your destination bucket. On the console, here's what it would look like. You browse to your source or primary bucket and click on Management. You'll scroll down to the replication section and you will see an option to create a replication rule. That brings you to the Create Replication Rule page. Here, you first provide the rule name and enable the replication rule. Next, you choose the objects to replicate. You can either choose to replicate the entire source bucket or choose a subset of those objects by specifying a prefix in your source bucket or the object tags that identify that specific set of objects. As a next step, you choose the destination bucket to replicate to. And here you will see the option to replicate to a bucket in another account. Amazon S3 cannot replicate objects without your permission. So you will have to grant permissions with the IAM role that you specify in the replication configuration. Amazon S3 will assume the IAM role to replicate objects on your behalf. Here, I already have an IAM role pre-selected because I have other replication rules on this source bucket. Next, you look at the encryption section. If your objects in the source are encrypted with AWS KMS, you'll decide at this stage whether you want those KMS encrypted objects to be replicated as well. And finally, you have the option to change the destination storage class. Maybe you choose S3 intelligent tiering if you're unsure of your access patterns in the destination bucket and you still want to optimize on cost. Or if you think this data in the destination bucket will rarely be accessed, you can choose S3 Glacier Deep Archive. At the end of this screen, not pictured here, you will also see other replication options, like replication time control, replication metrics, and a few other settings that we'll talk about in the next couple slides. I want to talk about a couple more replication options today. There are some use cases where customers want to keep a secondary copy of the data for business continuity and want to retain all versions of the data in the secondary, irrespective of what is deleted or not in the source. We see other type of customer use cases where they want to keep their source and destination buckets in sync. So writes in one are replicated to the other, and similarly, deletes in one should also get replicated to the other. For this latter type of use case where you want to keep your source and destination in sync, you'd want to also enable delete marker replication in your replication rule. And that's an additional replication option that we have provided for you. With delete marker replication, Amazon S3 will sync your deletes, same as your object and object metadata, between the source and destination buckets. Next, let's talk about replica modification sync. We have customers that want to replicate bidirectionally because they expect their users to be writing to more than one bucket at a time. And that's why we now have the ability to replicate your object and object metadata changes on the replica back over to the source bucket. This is an additional setting that you can apply to your replication rule at the time of configuration. In addition to this, customers will also sometimes use S3 RTC to ensure that the writes in both of the buckets are synced with the other bucket in less than 15 minutes. Here on the left is an example of a replication configuration that you can use to maintain two active buckets, where users are reading and writing to both regions, EU West and AP East, and both buckets are acting as the primary. You'll see here how the customer is using this replication rule to replicate data bidirectionally between these two buckets. The two-way replication rules keep the objects and object metadata in sync between the two regions. Take a look at the left-hand side of my screen, and you'll see how we have highlighted a few options in the replication configuration: delete marker replication, replica modification sync, as well as replication time control. All right, let's segue a little bit and talk about how some of our customers are using S3 replication today for their use cases. Here we have a travel industry customer that uses S3 replication for data protection. They keep their production data in S3 standard, which has all their reads and writes. They then use S3 replication to create a secure secondary copy of their data in a different region. They replicate to a different AWS account, so the current set of applications and users don't have access to the secondary copy. They use prefix-based rules to replicate some of the production data into S3 standard storage class and the remaining data into S3 Glacier storage class. The data that does not need to be accessed but still needs to be retained goes into the S3 Glacier storage class for cost optimization. Here's another example of how a customer is using S3 replication today to build multi-region availability for their users. In this case, most reads and writes are made to the source bucket, but applications will occasionally read from one of the destination buckets in AP Northeast 1. In this case, the customer is replicating to two different destination buckets with our new feature of the ability to replicate to multiple destinations. The customer has enabled S3 replication time control for one of their destinations for low latency. The other destination bucket is retained for data protection and does not need replication time control. So in this case, the customer has only enabled metrics and notifications for their cross-region replication traffic. This customer is also using different storage classes in their destinations as well as their primary to optimize on cost and performance. All right, to recap, today we talked about S3 Replication, which is an elastic, fully managed, low-cost feature to automatically replicate objects between S3 buckets. We talked about a wide variety of replication offerings like same-region replication, cross-region replication, and S3 replication time control, or S3 RTC. We also reviewed other replication configurations like the ability to replicate to multiple destinations, replicating delete markers, and replica modification sync. We really hope you liked hearing about these topics. Thank you so much for your time.